Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Psychosomatic Conversations today. We appreciate you being part of our community. We appreciate you investing your time with us. It is our most valuable resource, and we really want to thank you for that. Today, we are going to be discussing triggers and activations in the body and how to better understand them and also move through them in a way that is gentle. And the whole premise behind this is to bring more awareness to them so they don't swallow us whole, because sometimes they do, which is why we're doing this call. So thank you everyone for being here today. And this is my fellow mentor and teacher and friend, Linda Thackray from Australia in Sydney. So we both welcome you today.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And it's an exciting topic. It is a topic for many that can be activating in itself. So we really ask you to just do a little bit of self-care whilst we're talking about this topic, to notice what's actually happening in your body. And as we go through it, please feel free to put in some questions into the chat, any observations. We will be doing a couple of small processes so that you can join in, and we'll be asking for some comments on that as well. So enjoy this process, and with that, we will get started on what triggers and activations are for you. So the first part about this, we'd like you to consider a trigger or an activation, which for many people is not a friend. It's something that happens or appears to happen to them, and it can sometimes be the reaction to someone's comments. It can be related to sound, to smell, anything that creates an activation or an over-sensory response or reaction in your body that takes you away to a different place and time. And some of these activations can be, your relationship with them can be changed. How you currently perceive those triggers can also change as you change your relationship to them. And that was one of the reasons we wanted to bring this topic to the forefront, because as you learn how to work with them by understanding them and understanding your body, your relationship not only with yourself changes, but it changes with other people as well.
And with triggers, just kind of cover some of this. There are triggers that are really, can be really deep ones, like a death, loss of a job, sometimes birth. And those are a few. What we're looking at today is how are these triggers from the past, sometimes they become very present, how are they showing up in your life, and most importantly in your body, and how can we befriend those triggers and actually make them beneficial for us instead of fighting against them. I think the biggest battle that I see in my practice is what to do when they come up, because sometimes the activation can be enough that it creates more fear and sensation in the body that can scare us. And our intention today is to make a little more room for trusting your own body and allowing the process that we're going to teach you a few things, allow it to work with you versus against you.
So the first part about this is to firstly notice when you're activated, when you're triggered. You'll notice that for many people, there's going to be common themes in the common styles of triggers. And Christy's mentioned like the birth or the death of someone being a trigger. But if we look at the more common triggers of every day where you might be activated, we'd like you to start to just become aware of how would you, by feeling into your body, what would you notice in your body when you're triggered and when you're activated? And that could be a number of different things. It could be in your thinking style, it could be in the emotional field, or it could actually be in the physical sensation in your body. So some of the common ones might be, you might notice that your fists start curling up, or you put your hands behind your back, or you feel like you need to take up more space or less space.
Mhm.
Could be clenching the jaw. What are some of the ones you notice, Christy?
Well, we have a question in the chat, or actually not a question. Anxiety around someone else's impatience, even before I'm late. So this is one that came in through our group. And I would ask you to check in and where do you feel it in your body? And adding a little bit to that, is it something that's always been there that you've noticed? And sometimes it's helpful to understand where it comes from. Has it been there since you were little? Has it been there from a previous place of someone getting upset? To kind of trace back the threads to how far back do you remember feeling anxiety around someone else's state of being? Because that's what that is. Anxiety around someone else's impatient. You're already aware and could be very empathic to someone else's energy field. And sometimes little children come into the planet extremely empathic and are aware of that. And it can be put the body in a heightened state of awareness. And that's why it's so important to understand where is that connected to and where do you notice it to begin to allow it to give you some more information about it.
Yeah. And the key really is to start to notice when you're noticing it, how you're noticing it. So even before you go back into, what's really happening, as Christy just sort of said, noticing how it presents. So could we maybe ask the question of whoever put that in, do you notice any physical sensations that go with that, the anxiety, feeling of impatience towards or someone else being impatient? Because it's a great question.
Mhm.
I was
I know.
working with someone a couple of days ago, and they were noticing a pattern with actually with their mother. And the pattern was getting really angry at their mother. And in the communication that we had, coming to the realization that the anger was actually a default for not being able to change the situation, for not being able to make it better. And as you change that relationship, it also means that the anger doesn't have to show up, because that is showing up as a default for not being able to fix something. So it's a really fascinating way of looking at the body.
So
Sorry.
Linda, how did you suggest to the client to how do you change that relationship?
Well, part of it in noticing what's really happening and why the anger, like what's beneath the anger. When I look at not only clients, but certainly friends and even myself, when I've been triggered in the past, what I notice is the louder voice, there's a raise of the energy. And sometimes the energy can be unsuitable for the situation. Yeah. So when I say unsuitable, it's an overreaction to the event that's just occurring. So
Mm.
as soon as I hear that, either, in myself or in a client or in a friend, I know that they are being taken back to a previous time where something has occurred and the original hurt is in a previous time. So as you slow that down, and as you said, Christy, what are you noticing? Where have you actually gone within yourself? And what age are you? You
Mm.
get to really get an understanding of what's actually occurring here and now.
Thank you, Linda. That's helpful in understanding that relationship, because it is a relationship, isn't it?
Yeah.
With the trigger, and then with this intelligence that we have called our body. And this body, I think, is the most intelligent technology available, and it does hold the keys and the answers for us. So the person that asked, anxiety around someone else's impatience even before I'm late. I asked them, where do you feel that in your body? And this person said, anxiety, head pressure, and heart rate get elevated. So in psychosomatics, when we're looking at head pressure, sometimes the tendency with that is to overthink and try to figure it out. And there can be a looping that starts happening in the mind that really can move very quickly and sometimes create an instant headache. Sometimes it can even create dizziness or nausea, because depending on the severity of the trigger, it can go in so quickly that people can get dizzy and feel like they're going to pass out. And heart rate elevated also. So there's two parts happening. I would say there's a feeling part and a thinking part. And as we go into this, we'll go into that more, of giving you some tools about how to work with that a little bit. We have another comment from another participant that said, I am activated and triggered by people saying they are humanitarian and then only taking one side of the war or argument, taking a side. And yes, as I listened, this was in my childhood, with my mother always taking a side against me. Interesting. My body goes under tension and shallow breathing happens. Thank you for this insight. And I would be curious with that when we're talking about mother and childhood. Also in psychosomatics, we are talking about what's called the base. And I'm curious if, with this activation around mother, do you notice any tension or holding in your hips or your lower belly? Sometimes even a clenching in your toes. Sometimes the toes can come up. The body is our unconscious mind. And so it's communicating to us, whether we're aware or not, with a movement and or a contraction. And as we bring awareness to the contraction or the movement, for example, say with the activation, the toes get clenched. Sometimes over years, the toes never unclench. And the development of the tissue becomes hard, it becomes restricted, and the body can begin to change and heal as we notice. Okay, so this lady, I'm coming back to this woman. She says, yes, my big toe lifts. I'm not aware of hip tension, but I now have 2 hip replacements. So we are talking about the base, and the body is our map for how we understand where it sits and sometimes even what it might be connected to. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
Yeah. And the awareness around where that fits within how you've experienced parents, it's really a very, very interesting connection. And the relationship with the parents, the relationship with caregivers, even at school, as you have things that may not be fully resolved, your body gives you many, many opportunities to be presented with ways to alleviate some of the distress. So it's not necessarily about that you're not going to feel annoyed and frustrated with people who don't seem to be sitting on a neutral position. So you could still get annoyed with it, but it may change with the level of anxiety that goes with that, or the deep anger that becomes unproductive for your health and well-being. And, one of the areas that, I often see with people being triggered is that the way that they appear to the outside world versus the intense feelings they have on the inside is the internal conflict of not being able to share their frustration, their anger. And as it gets pushed down, because their personality is kind, sweet, gentle, loving. So sometimes there can be an energy that's much stronger than that. And the person will feel that they can't express it because it's not in alignment with who they are. And so with the suppression, it kind of gets pushed down. And then the next layer of passion, things that people are passionate about, it gets pushed down as well, to the point that this comes out more in an explosive sort of way when finally it reaches a point in the body that it can't be suppressed. And that is very much something that would be activated by a trigger. Could be somebody saying the wrong thing. It could be something simple as a tone of voice. Yeah, the person has done nothing but actually say, "Oh, really?" Or they'll have some sort of flippant comment, and the person will be just. So I think there's different styles of activations and triggers. With ones like that, what I find is after that trigger and after that activation, there's a lot of guilt, shame, blame, and an internalization, making them wrong. So again, I don't know if anyone here has ever experienced that type of activation, but I see it very, very commonly with people that make themselves wrong rather than to understand what's really happening here. Where have I gone? What age am I? And to developing that kind, loving, compassionate, curious mindset.
And Linda, with coming back to psychosomatics with the body, when there is energetic exchange, so an exchange would be thinking that someone's angry at you, like you said, or that the trigger comes in and we feel it in the system. And over a long period of time, if it is not expressed in one way or another, there's many ways, what happens is that energy becomes dense in the body. And that density creates a heaviness in the tissue. And then it creates what we call armoring, which is a hardening of the tissue. Sometimes people can get it in the neck. The person that was asking about the mother trigger, the big toe lifts, she said, as you notice the toe lifting over time, there can actually be tension underneath the toe and in the neck of the toe. And your body will actually show you, there'll be a line, say, this is my toe. There will actually be a line that gets created over time when that toe lifts. And why it's so fascinating to understand, what does my body do, or where do I feel it when I get triggered, is because we actually have some awareness and control. I say that lightly, to bring ourselves back into the body. So for example, if you notice the trigger around mother and the toe lifts, what I would love to see you practice is to notice the toe lifting and take a deep breath and allow the toe to touch the earth again, and feel your toe touch the earth, and bring yourself into present time with the breath. Because those little micro movements happen from a very, very young age, if it's connected with mother or father, and the body does a pattern that it's always done. And psychosomatics is such a beautiful map for us to notice, okay, where is it happening and what is it connected to? And can I pay attention and come back into the space of the body and settle into that? So letting the toe touch the earth again is exactly that. It's the breath, noticing, letting the body settle back down. And the heart rate should settle as you come out of that instant activation where your nervous system takes over.
Yeah.
And we have one more comment, Linda. Thank you. That helps me also look at why another person does take a side and allow me to find more compassion for them as well.
Right. And it's really interesting also to consider, how would another person know when you're activated? Because, one of the things we would love you to do is start connecting more with yourself, but also to be aware of the other person as well. Particularly in communication, it is a two-way street. So as we are aware of how we're engaging, you get insights into that as well. Often I see clients, particularly couples, where one person will walk out of the room when they can't solve problems, or when they are unable to communicate how they're feeling. And that walking out of the room can trigger the feeling of abandonment, not being loved, not being heard. And that place where people go inside of themselves can be a very lonely place, as opposed to understanding as well what is happening for the other person as they experience your trigger. Are they able to solve it? Not that you want to have it solved. You might want them to listen to you. But if they're a solver, then they may feel that they can't solve it. So looking at how do other people experience you, what would they notice, is also a really good question to ask.
That's such a challenge, Linda. It's such a challenge when there's an activation or a trigger to come out of your own self and notice them as well. I think
But noticing it before, like even now,
before
just
the trigger.
before the trigger comes up, like in a setting like ours, to just go, how would someone else notice that? So for me, it's going to be, if I get a little bit short, it means I'm a little bit pressured. And so rather than breathing, I might find that if someone was to experience me being triggered, that would probably be the first place to notice the dizziness and feeling like I've got to do it all now, as opposed to taking a breath, taking a break, going out, as you said, putting your feet onto earth, going, what's the consequence if it doesn't get done now? Is the earth going to end? It's like, no.
Very good example. That sacred pause is what I call that. It is a sacred pause. And I would say, if someone experienced me being triggered, Linda, I know for sure the first piece is I tend to shut down and stop talking. Because of my own experience, and I notice it, I can be so conscious of it. And it does take me a moment in that sacred pause to remind myself how old I am. Really, that does help me. Christy, you're 53 years old. Take a deep breath and connect back to myself in this present time, and understand that that trigger is from the past and it doesn't have to be present today. That is a practice. Please know that's a practice, and every situation is different. That's for me in my relationship with my spouse. That is how I do that. But it does take me, sometimes it's longer than a moment, being aware that, and giving myself the compassion to have a little time to reacclimate matters. And that I can take that time to settle back into my body and then come back in as my adult self is really helpful.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you do go back and you notice a younger part is playing out. Many years ago in the psychosomatic journey, I had an experience where I noticed that my behavior was really young. No one else was experiencing it, but I was experiencing it as like an internal kind of dialogue. And I was able to catch the fact that I was incredibly young, and it was like I was throwing a little bit of a temper tantrum, going, no, I've already done this work. Like, I've already resolved all of this. Why are we here again? And that realization that there was a part of me that was resisting the next level of learning. And as I noticed that, I couldn't help but laugh. But it does take practice, and that continual practice to actually reflect and go, what's really happening here? Because it's not about not being activated or triggered. We're humans. We have this as a human experience for reflection, for learning. So the triggers become our friends, and the insights we get from what's really happening here, and what do I need for myself at this moment in time.
Mm-hmm. So true, Linda. The other day I was teaching a face reading class on Wednesday, and that very question came up from almost everyone in the group was, why does this come up again when I've done all this work? And the conversation around it was, number one, we don't get rid of something and then it goes away. We work with our experience. We continue to heal, and then we work a deeper layer of that as we want invite self-compassion in, because I think our systems can only handle one layer at a time. And the more healing we have and the more wisdom we can allow to settle in us, there's a deeper piece underneath that of opening again and again.
Yeah. And I'm sure you also experience with clients, Christy, as well. There can be a fear of when something comes up again, there can be a fear of the original event. So the original event can be, I wasn't able to process it. I was anxious. I was depressed for years. So when the feeling comes up again, that there can be the whole fear associated with, I can't go back to where I was last time. And the body does have layers of healing. So between when it first happened to when it is now happening, what you'll notice is your resilience, resources, and tools that you have also changed. So you're never going to go back to the same place that you were before. But again, that fear can activate or trigger because it reminds you of where you've been previously. So if you literally take the learnings from it and see that as the layer of the onion, there can be tears, there can be a bit of pain between the layers, but your level of resilience and resourcefulness has actually changed as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I so agree. And that word resource is so important when understanding activations and triggers, because resources can be our breath, a resource can be a friend, a resource can be Mother Nature, which I think is one of the most helpful resources we have. Resources can be writing and moving and creation. And for us as human beings to sometimes it's helpful to make a list of your resources, because when a trigger happens, it can be our brains stop working.
Yeah.
And we forget that we have these resources, and to be able to look at that list of, these are some things that I have, these are some people that I can call, or what I can do to help settle and support me through this process I'm in.
I like that suggestion, Christy, writing a list. And also the first thing you mentioned was your breath. The breath is such an important immediate response to feeling overactivated. And if that can be the number one thing that you do, just simply pause, take a breath. You'll find that you'll often hold your breath when you're activated or triggered, or breathe very shallowly. So if you're trying to calm your nervous system, then the out breath ideally should be longer than the in breath. That actually changes the parasympathetic nervous system. It calms it. And sometimes you might need to go to the bathroom. Just take 30 seconds, 40 seconds, a minute, just to yourself, to remove yourself summons up the energy and come back out. That can also be very helpful.
For sure. Because well, I'll speak for myself. Sometimes when I get triggered, I have to go pee.
Yeah.
Because my kidneys are activated. And actually, that's a good thing then too, right? It can be either or, because it'll move me into that space of just settling in, taking a deep breath. And there again, the awareness of the body, what's happening right now inside of me as I take a breath, or as I notice I need to go to the bathroom, is, can I slow down? Yeah. Slow down my whatever I'm doing, or even whatever loop my brain just got in.
Yeah. And Christy, you mentioned before, I think it's really important to acknowledge people that are empathic. Highly empathic people can start to match and breathe the same way as the person that they're next to.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, as teachers of psychosomatics, you'll often hear the teacher like literally say during the emotional release trigger point, it's like breathe, because you notice yourself that your breathing has become shorter. And then you look around and everyone's holding their breath. So by changing the energy field of how you're breathing, you can also help other people that are anxious and are impatient, because they unconsciously start to regulate towards your body as well. Do you have any experience, Christy, that you could share with that? Did you notice that?
Many. Yeah. So the other day, once again, working with someone, and the beautiful activation comes up, a few tears are shed, and then the breath stops. And what I love to do is breathe with them so they can hear my breath. It brings in a different sense. So the breath in and doubling the out breath. And then what I will do, Linda, is make a sound. So that energy can begin to move out, not just with my breath, but with sound and hearing. So it's like a deep breath with a sigh, and to pull that sound out. Depending on someone's experience, sound could be one of those things that hadn't been saved.
Yeah.
To make a sound. And I would invite the curiosity of what would that sound be in me if a sound came out, not a word, but a sound. Because sound tells us so much about where the breath is.
Yeah.
Even you had said the voice gets louder, and or sometimes it gets softer and high pitched. Sound is such an important part of the somatic movement, to listen, to engage, and then slow the breath down so they can hear you, because it's a different sense that kind of jars the system out of here again, back into the body. And it even, when people say take a deep breath, I would add sound to that.
That's also a really beautiful way, when people can't sleep because they're overactivated, the mind is really going into overdrive, to actually do that really quiet, gentle sound, as you're doing a body scan going through, but to bring that sound coming through. So if you had a partner next to you, that they wouldn't be able to hear the sound, but your body would hear the sound. It's a really beautiful process of releasing that as well with the activation.
So I'm going to add to that, Linda,
Yes.
because we're somatic people. In bed, if that is happening and you make the sound, what I would suggest is going into the body, into the base, which is around your tush and your legs. Feel your legs in the bed. Feel your feet in the bed, and your back, your hips, your head. So you come into that feeling sense again. Oh, I am supported and held in this bed. I can feel the sheets. I can feel the air sometimes. And then take the deep breath and notice if there's any contraction in the body. And as you breathe out, to relax your tush to allow your legs and your shoulders to rest a little bit more in the bed or whatever you're lying or sitting on. But to start to bring in a little more of the body with the breath, with the sound, will help to slow down the activation too.
And that's helpful as well, because you're actually learning how to calm your body system when it's not under an immediate threat or pressure. So as you're calming it, you're actually developing a tool that you can use when you're with somebody, or even if you're not actually activated by someone. It could be going out in public. It could be meeting a group of people, doing a presentation. With that exercise that Christy said, you can practice that literally anywhere.
It's very helpful. It's very helpful. I find it helpful when, let alone working with people in general, not under an activation, I think is even more significant, because you're practicing what am I holding? That could be your breath. That could be a contraction in the jaw. It could be a contraction in the fist. Could be a contraction in the tush. Where am I contracting and holding when I'm just going to the grocery store or I'm doing my dishes? Because the unconscious mind, this body, will continue to do the same behavior until we bring awareness to it. And I invite everyone to bring awareness to it outside of an activation, because it's like going to the gym or on a walk. We practice, lifting weights or doing push-ups. It is a practice that sometimes those little micro movements create that massive macro movement, in that it comes more quickly when we are in an activation, because we've already practiced it. Like I practice it at a stoplight because I'm sitting, I'm not doing anything but looking at the stoplight in the cars. I literally practice this all the time by taking a breath and notice if my butt is clenched or not, and my legs are relaxed on the seat, instead of staying in my head or listening to whatever. That is my practice of coming back into my own space, present time, more often.
Yeah, definitely coming back into your own space. One of this comment may create like a little bit of an activation, but we'll see how we go. Is there a person that you notice that pushes your buttons, that activates you? And if there is, I'd like to ask you to explore within yourself whether or not that person has characteristics that you may dislike also in yourself. I'll throw that one over to you, Christy, to add to.
This is one of those reflection questions that is real, and I also personally struggle with, because I was just thinking of that person, Linda, and my throat tightened up. I'm like, yep. And yeah, I do notice those kind of things, and it's helpful because there again, the practice of noticing when power, I would say this, when power leaves me, like personal power, that's kind of what that is for me, Linda.
Yeah.
And then I practice again. Oh yeah, I'm coming back into the breath. Once again, I remind myself how old I am. I allow myself to either move a little bit or take some deep breaths, because it's a charge, and it's an instant charge that you said it. I felt it. And I can take a deep breath and get checked into my breath and my body. And the charge can move as we practice moving. And also to know in myself that there's still some healing to be done with that. Because if I'm still holding a charge when you have me think of someone, which happened that quickly, that tells me that I'm still healing parts of that for myself. Yeah. And I might for the rest of my life. And I'm coming into I'm coming into self-compassion with that, to know that that's okay. It's so okay that it may be this lifetime that is my practice, to reclaim my own power, to understand when it leaves me and when I call it back.
Yeah. But even just noticing that, Christy, I think can be really powerful, and a beautiful reframe. One that I've experienced once really strongly for myself is, what is my body system doing in the presence of that person?
Mm-hmm.
And the reframe was a contraction of energy in with this particular person, and noticing, my body doesn't actually feel safe in the presence of this person.
Mm-hmm.
So the reframe of it was actually remarkable, because it gave me much more compassionate towards her. I realized that she was just simply presenting as a teacher for me to learn how to hold space in the presence of what I felt was quite an overbearing energy. And that's where I love how how triggers can start to give you information if you're not afraid of them, but go, what can I learn from, but noticing what my energetic field's doing, but also the body as well.
Yeah, I had a experience last summer where that happened, Linda, which I thought was fascinating. This same person, I noticed when I was in their presence. So the old story in my head was, I don't like their intolerance. And it took me a couple days later when I brought that into my own awareness, and I realized how much I held intolerance for them.
Yeah.
And dang, that's a hard one to look at in that reflection piece. I get the intellectual part of it, and it is not simple to own that piece in myself too, that I was also being intolerant and not holding any room for them,
Yeah.
which is what I didn't like about them. Yeah, never easy.
Never easy. Absolutely not.
No.
Do we have a few questions that have come in?
Yeah, so we have one that says, interesting to note, when someone's action creates anger or hurt, how I might also act in that way at times too. It is something in me I don't like as well. I turn up the music and dance it out. If a phone call has triggered me, it gets me back into my body. I love that. So you use movement as a resource and sound, two different things, which I love, because sound, the vibration of sound within us and I think around us, also is helpful to shift our nervous system.
Christy, as you were reading that out, I was also thinking about, Christy and I both teach face reading as part of the psychosomatic therapy, but it's also a standalone thing. When you learn how to read people's faces, you actually become a lot more tolerant and compassionate towards how other people are. And some of it can be, you just need to look at a person's face and go, oh, that person's direct, logical, practical. They speak very much to the point, straight nose to the point. Um, their jaw could be somewhat squarish. So you might kind of go, like a little bit of sensitivity. So you start to hear a person through their perspective rather than being offended by people. And I think that's one of the things I love about face reading.
It's so helpful because it doesn't make it about you.
Yeah.
You can still notice your piece, but yeah, that we're creating more room within our lens than only what we've experienced or seen. And I think that is one of the most amazing gifts of psychosomatics, is beginning to read a face, which is what we teach, and learning about your own gifts and challenges, and also about those people who might be triggering you and their gifts and challenges. Because we all process differently, we hear differently, and that communication is happening all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any questions that you guys would like to put out to us that maybe you haven't already put in the chat that you would like us to give our thoughts on, our insights? So please put them in the chat if there's anything that you'd like to share.
One other thing I want to add, if you want to add any notes in there, please do, is I notice too when I get upset or I'm feeling overwhelmed, and this comes from somatics, if I can stand up straight and make my feet go straight and unlock my knees, that really helps me settle in as well. Because the pattern that I've had in the past is, like I said before, shut down, quiet, and then the body goes, the body follows exactly how we're feeling. And if that's part of what I'm experiencing, to open my body, pull my body up so I can actually access my breath in my belly, that's a huge game changer for me as well.
Yeah. And before the call, we were talking a little bit about journaling as well. And we definitely invite you to consider creating a journal for yourself just to notice some of the areas that you might be activated with so that you can start to develop some habits around how do I break a habit that's not serving me if it's habitual and often you engage in it because you've been triggered. And, even this is part of addictions as well. Like you might find you meet a particular person and you might go for a drink or a smoke or liter of ice cream, whatever that is for you. And you might notice in the presence of a particular situation or setting. So as you notice that, you can start to develop that curious mind, that kind mind, and also have a plan to do something different. It may not necessarily be that you don't have a drink or don't have some ice cream, but maybe take a look at changing the habit. It could be, I'm sitting with the distress and I'm drinking a beer or a glass of wine, and I'm going to have one glass of wine as opposed to the whole bottle. So there can be a negotiation factor as you settle with being with the part that's activated, so the part doesn't feel punished, but to just get to know the dialogue of that part. What's it needing? What's it, what other than the comfort that it traditionally knows, is it seeking?
Yes, because that only removes the discomfort for a small amount of time.
Yeah.
And then it tends to come back very quickly. Another question that you could ask is, what is it that is really upsetting me? And it takes a few moments as you sit there to ponder that. What is it? And or what am I reacting to? And how important is this? I know if I'm feeling hormonal, Linda, it's never pretty because it's that activation in my brain is big right now. And does it matter tomorrow? No. And it helps me to remember that I can give it the space and it will be better tomorrow. But there again, it is a muscle of practicing that often.
And some nice examples of that is you come home. I don't have children, but if you have got children, you come home, you left, there were no dishes in the sink. You come home and the sink is full of dishes. And the reaction is to get angry for many moms, possibly dads as well, is to get angry. But an example of what Christy is saying is to actually go, and what's really happening here? And what's really happening here?
Yeah.
So yes, it could be the anger that might be the first reaction, that's not actually what's happening. Yeah. So
No.
for a lot of people, that will be about disrespect and feeling unappreciated. And then you travel that down, travel that back. So there's a part that still requires healing around that disrespect, around that not being noticed. Because even the act of noticing the fact that a part of you, not all of you, but a part of you is feeling disrespected, you know that you can then hang out with that part. Whereas if you just leave it as I'm feeling angry, you may not be able to diffuse that in a way that actually brings some lasting healing.
Yeah. And I find, Linda, there's that reflection piece again. If there's a feeling of disrespect for me, I ask myself, how am I disrespecting myself? Because there's a reason why that's a trigger for me, like the dishes, for example. And how I might be disrespecting myself is not having clear boundaries about dishes. Number one is also about asking for what I need.
Yeah.
And not expecting people to figure out what I need because it's not their job. And if I am not aware that that's part of my own process and thinking that it's someone else's job to fix that, that can be a huge crank in my body, because that can happen again and again and again over years and years and years. And then somatically, sometimes what gets developed is constipation and hemorrhoids and or digestive pain, because there hasn't been a way out of the loop that happens in the mind. And I personally am not taking responsibility for my own activations and trying to find ways to not figure them out, but to understand them better, so I can have a more internal peace that exists more often. And it makes it much easier to have difficult conversations when I'm coming from a place of self-responsibility versus blame or feeling disrespected. It comes so much easier and is received in such a better way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So true, Christy. Beautifully said.
I've been there 1,000 times. Yes, raising children and being married teaches me much. Yes, about me and my responses to things that can be a 10 when they really should be a 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have another comment, Linda. Sometimes others are reinforcing how I feel about myself, and to look at that in me as a reflection.
Yeah. So that one's a really, it's taking a look at whether that serves well or not. But the teacher reflection is a really important one to take a look at. People that really challenge us are teaching us something. And as Christy said around the boundaries, really important to notice what boundary has been crossed, or whether you're putting, in fact, a healthy boundary in place. Because often it's about our boundaries. I often see, I see it in friends, I see it in family, I see it in colleagues, I see it in myself. Sometimes the boundary, when it's not clear, creates some massive challenges for people. The over giving, the over compensation, all of that can be also activating for other people. As we learn the healthy boundaries, we only learn that through the emotion of feeling like frustrated. That tells us what's actually happening here. It tells us that there's a boundary that's been crossed. That's why we have emotions like anger. And the flip side of that is anger and passion live on the same plane. So as we suppress some of the emotions, then we also suppress the opposite side of that, which is the joy, the passion. So the boundaries are often involved in all areas. And when we're looking at solar plex energy, which is your personal power, if you give your personal power to another person, Herman, who's the founder of psychosomatic therapy in Australia, he used to say, if you give your power to someone else, everything is great whilst they validate you. But when they no longer validate you, you become invalid. And over an extended period of time, an invalid person becomes an invalid. He loved the play on words. So yeah, it's really taking a look at how does that serve me? Does it serve me well? Great question,
Such a good question.
Great observation.
Such a good question. And I just want to place, Linda, we're having a conversation about things that sometimes for people are extremely difficult and for others not so much. And what we can do is one day at a time. What we can do is notice our patterns. We're talking about patterns every single day. Notice our patterns when we get in bed. Is there anything contracted? Can I relax? Can I let go of one piece, which might be just a contraction, like a clenching of the fist or a clenching of the jaw and talking through our teeth? Can we notice one piece and move a step towards, I would say, wholeness and empowerment? It doesn't happen overnight. It usually 100% of the time, I would say, doesn't happen without resources of a therapist, of good friends, of people who are healthy to give you good feedback. It isn't something that we do by ourselves.
And I'll just add to that, be kind, be gentle. You have the right to be enjoyed as much as other people enjoy you. So, yeah.
And maybe in your journaling, to put in some of the things that you love about who you are and what are some of your gifts that you bring to the world. What is it that you offer that you can begin to actually own without arrogance? Literally just to own it. I am sensitive. I am empathic. I am courageous. Those kinds of things and affirmations on a daily basis. And I'm a huge believer in tapping. And you can tap on your head and say those things. You can tap here. You can tap on your sternum and say them, because what you're doing is tapping, you're touching this intelligence and it's locking it into the body as you touch, as you speak, as we hear. So we're starting to integrate and turn on this system, this technology called our body, to work better for us.
Perfect.